Hi, today I'd like to tell you about a resource we've been developing to tackle the problem of poor numerical confidence in undergraduate life sciences students. This resource is called A Sum a Day, and hopefully it'll become apparent as the presentation goes on why we chose that name. So we identified an issue which has been very well recorded in the literature, and that is that life science students often display significant gaps in their fundamental mathematical literacy. And obviously, this can impact their grades, but more crucially, it can impact their self esteem. And that has knock on effects for their progression and even their desire to stay at university and complete their degrees. Further research has actually also shown that the inability to do such calculations in a lot of students is actually strongly influenced by a lack of confidence in their abilities rather than their ability themselves. And I think this is typified by some of the calculations, the types of calculations we'll be asking them to do. These are very basic, normal calculations that are carried out in laboratories on a day-to-day basis whenever we want to know the concentration of a solution, or when we want to dilute a solution and we want to make sure that we have the right final concentration. And such calculations are typified in these infographics I have on this slide, showing how we do mole calculations. And the calculations themselves are actually really simple. And I think this shows really that it's actually more to do with the students, how the students perceive they can do these rather than their actual ability. So to kick off the project, really, I wanted to get the students, undergraduate students themselves, to reflect on why they felt, if they felt they had poor confidence in their abilities to do these types of calculations, why they felt that might be. Now, some students straight away realised that it's because they simply need more practice, because they forget in between. If they don't use it very often, they forget how to do it. And so simply identifying that they needed more practice. Other students had sort of negative associations. They struggled, or they don't like maths. They never tried to be good at it. And more heartbreakingly still, other students reported real issues with their self-esteem around these types of calculations, that they doubted themselves and they felt they just didn't understand it as well as other people, so they didn't really believe in themselves. And perhaps most heartbreakingly of all, students who felt that this was just because they were a bit stupid. So following on from this, we developed a hypothesis. And that hypothesis was that repeated and regular practice of these typical numeracy problems in a no-risk environment with immediate feedback will increase students' confidence in their own abilities to do these calculations, and will also reduce their overall anxiety and negative feelings about doing calculations. It was important to us to really recruit some student interns for this project so that we would have input from their perspective. So we applied for LTDF funding, and that allowed us to employ two student interns, Milo and Eugenia, who are listed as authors on this presentation. And we employed, and together with them, we talked about how we wanted to deploy a resource, and they were then responsible for creating a really large bank of different versions of these typical calculations that we do in the lab every day. And to grade them from very basic and simple ones to ones with increased complexity and which were more challenging. And so the basic premise would be that the undergraduate students would be asked to complete one numeracy question 5 days a week throughout the semester, hence the name Sum a Day. And the questions would be presented randomly to the students from a difficulty level question bank in Moodle Quiz. The idea was that the feedback that they would get would be immediate, and you can see on this slide that if you get the question wrong, it will ask you to give it another go. The feedback's quite positively framed. It will also explain how you should have done the calculation, and most crucially, it will link immediately to get you to try another question like that. The difficulty of the questions was increased every 2 weeks, and students were incentivized to take part by being awarded a voucher on completion of the whole resource, and also were told that one or two of the questions would appear in their exam. So the resource was deployed as we planned on our undergraduate course with around 270 students. And out of the students who not only did the resource, but actually answered our survey questions, we ended up with a total of 49 who had used the resource and 12 who answered the surveys but hadn't used the resource. So at the start of the semester, unsurprisingly, students who didn't use the resource mostly reported themselves as being very confident in these types of calculations. And obviously that did not change over the progression of the semester. Students who actually used the resource at the start of semester, most of them graded themselves as having around average confidence levels, but around 14% said they were not confident at all. That changed quite significantly by the end of semester after using the resource, and all students reported that they felt they had at least average confidence levels, if not very confident. So that increased to 65%. Graded themselves as very confident in doing these calculations. And of the students who had used the resource, we asked them to assess their own ability in these calculations. And at the start of semester, most of them said they were pretty average. Around 30% ranked themselves as being very good, but 10% said they were poor. At the end of semester, 17% now ranked themselves as average, and 83% thought they were very good, showing a huge shift in how they would be able to describe their ability at these calculations. Interestingly, and there is a lot of literature out there that supports this, but when we broke this down by gender, we could see that women displayed the most dramatic shift in their confidence. So a lot of women, around 15%, were not confident at all before they started the resource. And by the end, more than 60% were very confident, and the rest felt they'd moved up to at least average. And whilst there's a shift in confidence with the students who identified as men, then that was not nearly quite the same shift. Both genders did show dramatic improvement in their self-assessed ability. This was most clear shift in women from under 20% who thought they were very good at the start to more than 80% ranking themselves as very good by the end. Interestingly, and I'm sure there's lots of psychological reasons for this, despite actually reporting themselves as having at least average confidence at the start, more than 20% of men actually described their ability as poor. That was rectified again by the end of the semester, end of using the resource. We were interested to see if students felt that this would be a useful resource to have in other courses, and overwhelmingly they felt they would like a similar resource in L3 and L4, and we have indeed copied this resource across to their L4, L3 Moodles so that they can continue to use them. And we also asked if they would like it expanded to include other biologically relevant calculations, which can include things like statistics or probabilities, that sort of thing. And over 55% of them thought that would be quite useful, and still 38% thought that there's a possibility they would also use a resource on those types of calculations. So our conclusions so far are that encouraging this kind of regular self-directed practice, crucially in a no-risk environment, they can do it anytime they like, they can do it at home, and no one knows if they've got it correct or not, gives the students time and practice and allows them to increase their confidence in their numeracy skills. It also positively impacts the students' assessment of their own ability, and students who identified as women showed the most dramatic changes in confidence and self-assessed ability. We still want to look at comparison of self-assessed ability versus actual ability, and compare the benefits of using the resource regularly in this way versus students who would use it just before an exam period as a sort of concentrated revision of these types of calculations. So it just remains to say thank you to all the students on GMC2 who actually took part in this project and surveys, and also to the LTDF for funding and allowing us to employ our interns. I can take any questions. I'm happy to discuss this further with anyone who's interested.